Well, hello and welcome to another edition of DXP Sales Radio. This is your host and announcer, Curt Tueffert, Vice President of Sales Development here at DXP. Today on our podcast, I have an interview, and the interview is with someone who is an absolute authority on all things that have to do with either today or in the future. But I'm not going to belabor that. I'm just going to allow Ira to come on in here and tell us a little bit. This is Ira Wolfe, and he's the president of just one of the dominant companies that talk about things like assessments and motivation and behavior and change in the future, and president of Success Performance Solutions. Ira, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Curt. It's good to talk to you again. I really appreciate it and the opportunity to do this. You and I go way back. I guess we met at the common publisher of the DISC assessment. We've been in contact for I don't know how many years, but it's good to be with you again.
Well, I appreciate that, and I've watched your career as when we first met in that Target training, and then, of course, as it has expanded, you have taken this whole idea of moving people into a different state, not a Tony Robbins state. It's not that kind of a state. It's much more of a something that's just empirical, using the assessment technology and just kind of gathering all that information. And tell us about some of the books that you've developed in the podcast, and tell us a little bit about Success Solutions.
I started Success Performance Solutions. It had a prior name to this, but started it 21 years ago, and things have evolved. But when I started it, I was primarily going to work with small to medium-sized businesses, mostly professional practices, because I started out in healthcare. That was my original career. And as I moved on, I would talk to clients and listen to them. And what they would share with me was that they were starting to have trouble finding people and hiring people. That goes back right before the dot-com boom, or bust, whichever side of it you want to look at. And so people were hiring like crazy. At that point in time, people were worried that there weren't going to be enough people to fill all the jobs that were created. And so I put together my first book, which was called The Perfect Labor Storm, because I was actually sitting in the Perfect Storm movie. Many of you probably either read the book or saw the movie. And there were these three kind of incidental storms that if they arrived on any other given day, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But when they converged, it created these huge tidal waves and, a big disruption off the coast of New England. And I said, that's exactly what's happening, because we've got age demographics. People were talking about health care. We're still talking about health care, but we're talking about it back then. But we had aging demographics. We had at that point, 20 years ago, we had this new generation coming into the workplace. We had Generation X, which was different than the baby boomers and anybody before that. We had education issues. We had skill gaps. So we were outsourcing jobs. So we had all these forces, and everybody was trying to fix one of them. And not my solution, but my conclusion was that it was convergence of all these different storms, all these different factors that was creating an upheaval. And it would take a while, because in the past, nothing happened quickly. We can talk about how quickly it happens these days. But within 20 years, which is now, the workforce, the workplace, jobs would look incredibly different than they did before. So that was my perfect labor storm. And then as part of that evolution in mid-2000s, people say, what do you think about these nuke young kids? So the conversation switched from Gen X to Gen Z to Millennials, or Generation Y. And so I put together a second book, which was called Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, which turns out to be the convergence of the tired, the wired, and technology. Because technology, has been around for a while, but in the mid-2000s with the Internet and Facebook and social media and Moore's Law in place, things just starting to move much quicker than anticipated. And I know you and I were in a conversation earlier about, if we think that we think that there's going to be a massive change in 5 years, whether it's to our career or our business model or to a product, probably cut that in half, because there's some competitor or there's some force that's going to accelerate that.
For the listeners here who are driving or who are listening on their smart device, you said Moore's Law, and if you could define that a little bit further, because you and I know what that is, but there may be some people on the call who don't know what that is.
Yeah, Moore's Law has been around. It was the founder, I think it was the founder of Motorola, and he predicted that the computer power would double every 2 years, and that has held true to this day, but it became beyond computer power because while computer power doubled every 2 years, what's happened is, just kind of as an aside, why we have this thing called exponential change now, even more than that, so you don't even have that 2-year time frame. What's happened is the ability to micro-size the computer chips has allowed more transistors and more chips to go on a small area. So it's not only that the computer power is doubling, but there's many more of them in a smaller space doing the job. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about robots and self-driving cars and technology. And it's just crazy. It's mind-boggling how fast the world is changing.
Absolutely true, and I've had the privilege of reading both The Perfect Labor Storm and Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. I've had the chance to highlight and underline and reference some of the dynamics of those two books, and every author has a reason or an impetus for writing their book. Now, you are about to embark on another book, and what a clever title, When the Shift Hits Your Plan. What was the background motivation to create this book?
Well, a good question. It started really with rewriting Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. Googlization, I wrote the book in 2009, and it was in 2009. I wrote it and published it within that year. But when you think about it, in 2009, the iPad did not exist.
Wow.
There was no such thing as a tablet. So we did have the iPhone was introduced, I believe, in 2006, might have been 2007, but somewhere in there. They certainly came out with a couple different versions, and that transformed our old mobile phones. But the tablet itself did not exist, at least a good one, until 2010. But that came out after I wrote the book. So part of it is I wanted to update the Googlization part, the technology, and as I started to do my research, and I write a ton. I do a lot of blogs and newsletters, and so there's a lot of free resources. People can just Google my name and find it. But I tried to, that was the impetus to make that change. But along the way, I also started to reread my material about millennials. And I know that's always a big question this day. How do you hire? How do you retain? How do you motivate? How do you sell to a millennial? And the one thing that we forget is when I wrote that book, the millennials were still in their 20s. So there were still some millennials that were in high school. And the oldest millennials were in their late 20s. Well, the oldest millennial today is 37 years old. They're not kids anymore. It's not how do we retain and motivate these kids coming out of college. That's not even the millennial generation. Because while people are still worried, this is how fast things change. While people are still trying to figure out how to hire, retain, motivate, and sell to and market to millennials, it's Generation Z, the following generation. And that label may not even fit, but Generation Z is now entering the workplace. They've got billions of dollars of money to spend. They're the most digitally active group because millennials learned how to use the internet because it wasn't available when they started. They learned how to use social media because they weren't doing that since they were kids. But Gen Z has, and it's a completely different mindset. There's some good characteristics that they bring. They're a lot more practical than some of the millennials and even some Gen X. But they are. It's just a very different generation. So, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, I can easily just rewrite the technology chapters and expand them because there weren't that many. But then it said, I've got to rewrite even the millennial conversation And from that, I actually published an article, and it was Confessions of a Recovering Millennial Basher. Because I was one of those people that talked about the trophy kids, and they were narcissistic and they were self-centered. So here's how Mr. Employer, you had to market to them, and here's how you had to manage them. But they grew up, and I've wrote a couple other articles too about it. And the reality is that through history, I've got quotes going back to Shakespeare and Chaucer, and I can't remember his name, but he was a Greek economist who complained about the young kids today. We're going back to 400, the year 400, that they were complaining about young generation doesn't respect their elders and doesn't communicate the same way, and they don't have the same work ethic. So the reality is the millennials who were, I wrote about then that are 27 are now 36, and a lot of them are very responsible adults. Some of them own businesses, but they're responsible adults. They're doing well. There are some that aren't, but I'm a baby boomer. I'm an older baby boomer, and I can tell you for sure that I can name more baby boomers who I think are narcissistic slouches and feel entitled than I can millennials. I work a lot with young people. I hang around the university. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and there's just some incredibly smart, ambitious, giving, philanthropy, really social giving young people today. And if you can't find them, you're looking in the wrong place.
To your point on that, we see that too here at DXP as we're looking at these multi-generations that are in our workforce. A lot of people are not leaving the industrial distribution or the industrial side of the world yet. They're staying because they don't have enough 401k, they can't retire, they can't afford it, so they're staying longer, and then we're getting them in their 20s. And so we've got this slice of all kind of different things happening demographically, and this coupled with this Generation Z and Moore's Law and the rapid development of technology, then, you look at the subtitle of your upcoming book, How Smart Companies Thrive When the Wired, Tired, and Technology Converge. There is this convergence, which is almost like a car wreck, if you will, of all these things that are happening, which you are highlighting in your white paper right before the book comes out. And it's fascinating in how you look at historical disruptive innovations like the telephone and the printing press and automobiles and how that changed the landscape. And now we're moving into other things which are just as disruptive. And you kind of coined this term of continuous disruption, and it's VUCA, V-U-C-A, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How are you going to approach this into your book and into where the world is going? How can you help us get ready for things that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous?
Yeah, it's obviously hard. The first thing is to get people to accept that, VUCA is it's not a problem and it's not a solution. It just is. It's the world. So as you said, our world is volatile. We wake up any given morning and don't know, what new products there. We don't know what the financial markets are going to do. We don't know when the terrorist attack's going to happen. So it's volatile. Mm-hmm. It's uncertain, and that's the biggest challenge in trying to put together a book is how do you deal with uncertainty. It's much more complex, and at least understanding complexity. What complexity is, we're used to working in a linear world where if you did if you had a solution and you saw A and you applied some function to it or you did something to it, you went to B. It was a linear transaction. And what complicated is that there might have been a detour, and I don't even know if it's in the latest white paper you did, but I was trying to kind of define it for people. So A is, I'm on a straight road, I'm out west, I can see hundreds of miles, there's no cars, there's no disruptions, but ultimately I can get to point A to point B with no interruption, no detour. Complicated is point B is when there's a detour. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden there's an accident or there's some construction and they take you off a back road, and most of the times you can figure out your way, especially if you have a GPS, and get back on track. What complexity is one is there's no roadmap. You're not only traveling down a straight lane. You're going down up a windy hill over a mountain and and your brakes give way. The rain and sleet starts coming down. There's traffic coming at you, toward you, behind you, and there's no guardrails. That's sort of the kind of what a complex world looks like. And how do you sift out all the noise? And I think that's the biggest problem people have is with complexity. There's so much information coming in that you have to get rid of the noise. And that doesn't mean turning off your cell phones, by the way, and then detaching. But it's how do I identify the people I should be listening to, the information that I should be digesting, and block out the rest, or at least not pay attention to it. And then you have ambiguous. And the fact is that once you go through all those stages, there's still no one correct answer. There may be 2 or 3 correct answers, and then you have to, make that decision. So on the flip side, and this is preliminary. I mean, this is actually not my theory, but it makes sense. So it's a starting point of figuring things out. And I'm working on. I think there's a better model out there. I just don't have it yet because it's uncertain. But the solution for volatility, not a solution, but a kind of an antidote for volatility, is having a vision. You have to be really clear on where you want to go. What does it look like? Where you want to be. Even in attracting millennials and almost any generation, but especially millennials, they want to know, what's the purpose of your organization? What role do you see in the world or in your community? What's the purpose that you can help them provide? So, vision's an antidote for volatility. Understanding is an antidote for uncertainty. And understanding just means understanding the environment. You have to read. You can't take people's word for it. You have to kind of come out of your comfort zone, both intellectually and personally. So on the intellectual side is you have to read. You have to change your sources. You just can't check with your buddies and the old group thing, the group think thing, to make sure that you have confirmation. I have for years tried to surround myself with people who I may not even like them, but they challenge me. They make me think, what is it that they said that they don't get? What is it that sort of perplexes them and me? And, what can I do about it? I mean, sometimes there's no answer, but at least it makes you think. The other part of understanding is, and again, this is where you and I, where we met, is really understanding yourself. Mm-hmm. People have got away for a long time on their education, their experience, and their positive traits and their negative traits. I can't even say negative traits. They're vulnerable areas. Some of their weaknesses didn't matter. They just, the other strengths and their expertise was enough to get them through. But ultimately, in today's world, you not only have to be confident, but you have to understand how other people might see you. Because you can see yourself as confident, and they see you as arrogant. Or you see yourself as an expert, and they see you as a know-it-all. And it comes down to endorsement, trust. We've got a good friend, Judy Suter, acquaintance. Yeah. She lives and dies by the endorsement model. It's about trust. So, the DISC model or whatever model you want to use, or coaching or mentoring, is really having feedback from other people to say, here's how I see myself. How do you see me? Mm-hmm. Because you're just not going to get away with that anymore. We don't have that margin of error within our own being. So understanding is both becoming more of an expert, subject matter expert, and also, becoming kind of a better person to person. Mm-hmm. And then finally is, ambiguity is, the solution to that is agility. It doesn't matter what you were 20 years ago or 10 years ago or what award you got last year. Every day is a new day. And I love a quote. It used to be the internal motto with Facebook. It's no longer. But it used to be, your journey is only 1% complete.
Correct. And
that's every day. And the reality is every day, and we may not like it because for anyone who's, certainly an older baby boomer and ready to retire, you're thinking, good, I'm like at the 95% line. And I'm telling you, I mean, your days are numbered, and if you've got enough put away and you don't have to worry about it, great. But if you still want to remain active and relevant, even with your grandkids, I mean, if you want to remain relevant, you've got to look at every day. Maybe it's not 1%, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 50%. But you've got to look at every day that there is so much you don't know and so much you need to grow into. The other part of that A is abundance. And that, we didn't talk too much about it, but I was preparing for a TED Talk. I don't know if I'm going to end up doing it. But in that, the goal is we live in an incredible lifetime. And we're very fortunate, although we don't think it is because we're just bombarded by all this negative news. But there are so many opportunities out there, not for material wealth, but just the quality of life. And a lot of it has to do with artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and bioinformatics and genomics, and there's a whole host of things, and I'm sure in some regards it's affecting your industry as well and your business. But it's going to revolutionize how products are made, how they're delivered, how they're sold, how they're used. To me, that's incredibly exciting, and I want to be a part of it. I don't want to say, "Gosh, I'm glad in 10 years I won't have to deal with it." I hope I'm around for another 25 or 30 years, and to see that, I want a good quality of life. But the good news is, in the age of abundance, we will have a better quality of life.
I love what you said about just this whole counterbalance, whether it's volatility, we're going to use vision, uncertainty, we're going to use understanding, complexity, we're going to use clarity, ambiguity, we're going to use agility. I definitely think that this book, when it gets published, and even the white paper that you've given me the permission to distribute to some of my sales guys, helps us in the sales capacity to look inward. And I know that you're an authority on the DISC profile and numerous other profiles to help customers and companies and coaching and talent management to determine what are the strengths and challenges of an individual so that we can invest in the right things to keep that person and make them productive. Taking all that into consideration, refocusing this conversation to a sales side of it, we're thinking about sales. You've been in this game for so long. You consult to Fortune 500 companies on a daily basis. What would you say are the top 3 things a sales professional needs to improve, knowing this VUCA is right there in their midst?
Well, one is, I think, in a case like that, I think it's even understanding, because I don't think you can create a vision. Many times you can't create a vision if you really don't understand what your market is. So don't discount things. And let me give you an example, and it's not specific to sales, but the example will help. We just had some landscaping done, and he's actually a teacher, but he's another example, a millennial, 34 years old, has this thriving summer business. So he comes over and does some landscaping. And when he came over, he said, he's going to do a design. And he came back, and it was a hand-drawn design. And he said, I don't use computer programs. I like doing the design. We're very creative. I've got a good art background. And he did it. It was beautiful. But he said the computer programs were too constraining. And I said, well, there's programs out there now that you can scan in all your old drawings that you did by hand, or take pictures. Just take a picture of a design that you did. And the software program will analyze it and pick out the common themes. Therefore, when you go into your computer program, the computer program is going to learn how you think, how you lay things out. That was the start of it. So he started to get interested in that. But beyond that, I said, how is it going to affect you when the 3D printer, when you come in and say, here's the plants that we're going to, I'm recommending. And instead of going to the local lawn and garden area, you're going to go to your truck and you're going to print out the shrub. And not only will you print out the shrub, but they now have 3D elements that have taste and smell. So it's not like, I don't want plastic plants. These aren't going to be natural, but you're not going to know the difference. And, the whole process is changing. Now, is that going to happen overnight? No. But I I said to him, I think in 10 years, I don't know, because, again, you and I were just talking today. I mean, self-driving cars, we were thinking is 2025, and I just heard an announcement that Uber is putting self-driving cars, self-assisted driving cars, so there's still a driver in it, in Pittsburgh, I think next month. And so when we were anticipating that 5 to 10 years down the road, now you find that it's really, really accelerated. And now they're really expecting that there's going to be a couple 100,000 on the road, in the next 3 years. Now, an example like that, and again, these aren't specific to you, to your industry, but just in sales, is, and maybe it does. If you think about self-driving cars, and Allstate actually recognized this in their strategic plan. They identified that they have the potential to lose up to 90% of their insurance premiums, because with self-driving cars, there's going to be 90% less accidents. Forget the Tesla thing that just happened, because it's 1 out of a couple million miles. So now, what's the downstream from that? If you don't have accidents, well, then you don't need as many repair shops. You don't need collision shops. You don't need insurance adjusters. You don't need, you're not going to use as much paper. Think about the downstream, not that, the self-driving cars isn't going to affect me, but if you manufacture parts, or some of your clients manufacture parts, or are in the automotive business, or any related business, or even related to the insurance business, you may be affected because their business is going to be affected. And that's what complexity is. I mean, we're all interconnected in crazy ways, and interrelated ways, and interdynamic ways. So, specific to salespeople, the number one thing I said, I can say is start reading. I mean, really, you don't have to read Futurist magazine, but, think about when you see a self-driving car, don't discount it. When you think about 3D printing, don't discount it. When you think about nanotechnology, how's it going to affect your business, or artificial intelligence, or robots, or drones, go beyond that. Think about how it, and I do this all the time. Don't think about how it affects you, your clients. Think how it affects your clients' clients. Because if your clients' clients aren't buying products or services, you're not going to be selling products to your clients.
Good point. And Ira, right at that point, you really struck for me at DXP. We've got this great market segment on supply chain services, and led by one of our futuristic thinkers, John Jeffrey, and he has to think about his client's client, and yes, delivery mechanisms and consolidations of vendors, and the ease of delivery and the ease of doing business. And eventually we look 2, 5, 10 years from now, that's going to be automated. If you can get a driverless car, then you can get a driverless warehouse. You can get a robotic system. You can get industrial distribution with retinal scans. And it just, everybody says, oh, Curt, that's 8, 10 years from now. Moore's Law says that's 2018. And your 3D printer is a whole new thing. And then I'll throw 2 more on top of that one. Virtual reality and this fragmented reality of just knowing that, hey, I mean, this VR for the gaming, fine, that's great, but VR for operations, for learning, for things that haven't even been developed yet. I mean, 4 months ago, we would have never thought about a game that you play on your smartphone that overlays your GPS and landscape, and the next thing you know, you got Pokemon Go, and it becomes crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly. I just got in the mail today. I write for the business magazine, and my article was when the shift hits HR's plan. It was a little bit more specific, but ultimately that's what it was. It was about Pokemon Go, and most people blow it off. What are kids? It's so dangerous. Kids are wasting their time. You have to go beyond that. You have to think about the technology, and you're absolutely right. It took real landscape. It's actually not virtual reality. It's augmented reality, so it's a combination. But it is, think about any visit that you have to a client now, is that ultimately you're going to be able to, on a game, somehow implant yourself in that company, or your clients, your clients' customers are going to be able to go shopping, on their smartphone, but it's not going to be looking at a JPEG image or an image. They're going to be looking at the actual store or the layout or the factory or the plant or the distribution or the highway. And they're going to be able to maneuver themselves around there just like they were there. So, again, is it going to happen overnight? But no one thought that Pokemon Go was going to do what it did. And just to give you an analogy of that, how fast things move, it took 75 years for 50 million people to adopt a telephone. It took 5 years for 50 million people to use the internet. It took 35 days to get 50 million people to use Angry Birds. And then Pokemon came around, and they had 25 million users within 7 days.
Whoa!
The adoption rate, and beyond that, if they're using that, if that's their experience, just like Amazon, if you get treated well buying products at Amazon, you better be able to deliver a similar service. Mm-hmm. So if your experience using Pokemon Go, there's a whole generation that's what they think is reality. And for them, that is reality. So why do they have to call in or go online, and this is going to even change Amazon's business, go online and fill your cart with images of what you want. I can actually go shopping in a store, in a grocery store, and pick the products. And I just saw the other day where, I can't remember it is, maybe it was a Sam's, and some of the other areas might have it too, that you can put on your smartphone an app, and as you're going around the store, you just scan the item, it starts checking it up. You use Apple Pay or your credit card, how you want to pay it, and you just walk out the door. The only thing is you have a little, not the greeter, but the person at the door checking to see that you paid for all those products. But it's all on your phone. They're not even have the cash registers. I mean, they've gone beyond the kiosk.
Yeah.
And that's partly, augmented reality.
Well, as we've been looking at this interview with Ira here and some of his ideas on and all of these things as it hits when the shift hits your plan, the takeaway here for us who are on this call is it's for sales, it's education. We've got to be on top of our game when it comes to not only the technical side of the things that we do, but also the commercial side of the things that we do so that we can be aware and that we can have the education so that when it comes time to combat this VUCA, this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we can turn around and we're going to combat that with vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. Well, Ira, before I let you go here, I always have to ask this question to the experts. If you could bend the horizon or peek around the corner, what do you see coming toward us in the next 3 to 6 years?
Wow, I think we covered a lot of it.
Yes.
There's no question artificial intelligence is going to be, really high on that. I think beyond that, and people may not know, artificial intelligence, it's like, oh, we're going to have a robot. Well, what's happening is the robots are now learning, it's called machine learning, but the robots are learning how to take care of robots, and robots are building robots. Now, they still need humans to figure out all the other problems that aren't routine. So I think artificial intelligence, I think overall is just the theme we've been talking about. It's not if the shift will hit your plan, it's when. And if you think it's beyond 5 years and you're going to be able to have an adoption rate, you're wrong. So I think the theme is that over the next 5 years, we're going to see massive disruption in all markets. We're going to see business models start to fail. We're going to see lots of new products. And we're going to see some companies take advantage of all the opportunities that's out there. And, and again, I think leaving somebody, not to scare people, but I think it's, because VUCAs, by the way, it's a dark, scary, dangerous-sounding word. And that's what I was trying to come up with another acronym as part of the solution. But I think ultimately it's an age of abundance. There is going to be so much new opportunity, and if you're willing to understand what's out there, and you're willing to develop clarity, and you're willing, and you're going to adapt and learn new skills, you'll have the world by your tail. Because the good news is there's a lot of other people that just aren't going to do it.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to do this. and to share with us the vision of your new book, your third book that's coming out. We're excited about that coming out. And for those of you who are on this call listening, either in your car or on your smart device, this was a phenomenal interview with Ira Wolfe, who is just a phenomenal person that's president of Success Performance Solutions. And Ira, thank you very much for coming on the show here, and I look forward to talking to you in a future date about some of the developments within DISC and some of the other assessments.
Yeah, thanks very much, Curt. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll keep you updated as the Shift Fits Your Plan develops.